welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of an absolutely gorgeous memoir. It is a book that sort of hijacked my weekend. I spent the entire time reading it, and it was time well spent because it's really beautiful and very insightful and very inspiring. So before I, ramble any longer, let's welcome our guest. Hello. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, my name is Sandra Schnakenburg, and this is my debut memoir that I wrote probably over the past 10 years. I come from a corporate finance background. I worked 30 years in the corporate world, and I left the corporate world to write this story. The story came to me before I was a writer, so I had to learn to write, and I studied writing for quite a few years and then incorporated my skill set into making this book read like fiction. I just wanted it to be a page turner, and it's a true story, and it's hard to believe. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Truly, absolutely. It's gosh, a flooring story. It's even hard to find the words to describe it without, wanting to spoil too much for readers because discovering the story in its own time is one of like the great, I think, pleasures of reading this book. So could you tell our readers a little bit about, the journey toward writing this book? 'Cause it's a fascinating one. On your website, you mentioned that you are a writer with a fascination for family legacy. So yeah, could you talk about how that interest and also, the sort of the task that you were given, how that led to this book?
Yes, it was a big ask. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story. It's actually a story of love, resilience, and uncovered truths. And it's really like we often really don't know the people we love the most. It's kind of the premise of it. And our beloved housekeeper, Lee, lived with our family for 30 years. She came when I was 3.5, and I had an attachment to her immediately. She was just like the holy grail of our family, positivity, contentment. We were a family of complicated chaos. My father was a narcissistic, verbal abuser, and we were all beaten down. My mother was so like lost and confused. She just had her sixth child. We lived on a property that was very remote, 44 acres out in the middle of nowhere. And so we were isolated, and the only outsider that had privy to everyday life was Lee, the housekeeper. But unbeknownst to us, she came to our house to hide out. She had her own secret, and that's one thing I can tell you without giving away the book is that she didn't want to be found and she didn't want to be found out. And we were like the family that actually she needed somebody far away, isolated, that nobody can find her. So she came to us with a different name, a different birth date, and she fabricated a past that never existed. These are all truths that I unraveled when she asked me to write her story on her deathbed. I was, shocked because I didn't know her story at the time in 1994. This is 30 years from this year that she asked me to do this task. I put it on the burner for 15 years. And then when my mom passed away, I found her ashes in my mom's closet because she apparently had no family. She told us she had no family. And I went on an investigative journey to find the burial spots of her husband and son, which she told us, died in a car accident. All that was fabricated. At the end of the day, we unraveled this incredible truth of what she went through. And her past was so horrific and so dark. I can understand why she couldn't talk about it, but she survived something unthinkable. And in order for her to move forward, she reinvented herself. She became a different person and arrived at our doorstep as a humble servant a housekeeper with so much wisdom and had so much intelligence that we were like, where did you get all this? And she always said, well, I read a lot. That was her answer. I read a lot. And it was a lot more than reading. She lived it. And but that's the brunt of the story. Sometimes you just never know people, and the love she gave to our family was so incredible. We held her at high esteem. So we're really grateful for this person to come in our life, but we're also really shocked that she was concealing her own past the entire time she lived with us.
Yeah, the reading the book really got me thinking about the process of growing up and growing older, and how
Mhm.
anybody who has been in our lives that long, like since we are children, we kind of get to know twice, right? We get to know them once as a child, and then once again as an adult who knows the world more, is a little bit less naive, perhaps. So that happens with every long-term relationship, but this is such an intense magnification of that, getting to know somebody and realizing that they lived an entirely different life than, what you thought is, gosh, yeah, it must have like, does it change the way that you thought about your past and the relationship? I mean, obviously the love was always there and that was not going to change, but you know, what insights into your own experience did you get from it?
Well, it was such a shock that she pulled it off, honestly. She left some breadcrumbs in our family. There were a lot of unanswered questions, like why did she walk so funny? She had some feet issues, and we know now why. She always said she got frostbite, and they never went back. We're like, well, why didn't you put, boots on or something? She had false teeth at a very young age. That was always like why my mom and I, or the rest of the family, couldn't understand that. She um she had affinity against bathtubs, and that was kind of a clue too, which there were just these subtleties. And but other than that, she kept her cool. And she also kept her life within boundaries. We were only to talk about the stuff in the box, the baseball game, the crossword puzzles, the TV shows, her caramel corn popcorn, her coffee, these things, these comfort things, her conversations. Her Christmas list was the same every year. Her The person she was very defined and very, she knew herself so well. I love that. She was just so simple, where our family and our life was so complicated and chaos. She brought peace and contentment into our home. And I think the premise of the whole story is, how does somebody do all this and
Mm.
then leave this task to write her book, not giving us a hint?
Yeah, I imagine receiving that request, because you talk about how it was a story that you were interested in long before, this was even asked of you. And so to experience this sort of 180 of like, no, you don't get to know this. You can't know this. All right, now you need to know this so that you can tell this story. Can you
Right.
talk about what your research was like, how you went about investigating her past?
Sure. Well, 15 years after she died, those 15 years, I put the request on the back burner because I had twins. I was living overseas in Australia, and I was busy and I was working in corporate finance. So, and then 15 years later, my mom passed away, and then we found her ashes in the closet. And at that point, I remembered Lee asked me this promise. So why don't we don't know where to put Lee. We didn't want to split her six ways. We didn't know, we just wanted to put her together with her past. So bring it all together. The whole family agreed together. Well, Sandy, why don't you find out where her husband and son are buried and look for their grave sites, and we'll have a ceremony. We'll bring her ashes there, and we'll put her to rest with them. And unbeknownst to me, I, searched for 2.5 years and I found nothing. I couldn't get anything. And I was at the dog park one day and I was so distressed. And my girlfriend, who is like, I had no idea she was like ex-CIA, she goes, why are you distressed? And I told her all about Lee, and she said, I can help you find her. That night, she sent me a list of her family members. And I knew it was her family because it was Hazel was an older sister of hers. She told me she had a sister named Hazel. That's all I knew. But the youngest person, she said she was the youngest of five, was a different name and a different birth date. And I was like, it's her family, but that's not Lee's birthday that we've been celebrating for 30 years, and that's not Lee's name. So we were like, but it's Lee. I know it's her because that's her sister, and this is where she grew. There was some clues there that this was her family. So I just started to call around. The friend of the dog park gave me some background information on the family members, and I was able to call some numbers and continue to find out more and more in depth that the family had been looking for Lee for like 45 years at that point. They didn't know what happened to her. They thought she had died in some gutter. And what we, unveiled about her was just incredible. Like the past was so shocking. Our family took 5 years to actually process before I could even put pen to paper. We were like, how do you even put together a story like this? Because it's not only a story about Lee, it's a story about like who she was in our family and who she came to be. So some of the lessons were like, it's not what happens to you in life, it's what you do with what happens to you. And she rose above all the pain and darkness of her past and became a vehicle of light for our family and love and resilience. And she taught us how to live in the moment with joy. And the spirit of the Chicago Cubs really came through in her and in our family. We all became big Cub fans, and we saw her joy. We were like, how do you express that? We lived in fear under my dad's roof. We were scared all the time until Lee, taught us joy.
Yeah, I think there's another really beautiful lesson there. You were talking about how she brought peace and stability and a sense of joy to your home. And I imagine that given, her life experiences, she was also seeking that for herself a little bit. And so there's something quite lovely about like when you create that for somebody else, you're also creating it for yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Speaks to like the really fascinating way in which your family's lives are intertwined. So, can you talk about maybe how writing these intertwined stories, did it change how you viewed your childhood? Or did it change how you viewed your parents?
Mhm. It did. Very much so. We grew up in a bubble in the country of Barrington, and we always thought we were really special. Okay. Um, it was sort of like a glass castle kind of idea. We were behind this big house and we had toys and things. But in the inside and in the heart, we were stressed all the time. It was the process of survival. And while writing this book, I had a chance to be out of that emotion, out of those struggles that I had as a child. My dad was very hard on me, particularly. I was the fifth daughter out of six children. The boy finally came after me, so I was sort of the invisible kid. He was just really hard on me because I was like a disappointment. We thought I was the boy. And I reflected back on those difficult times and how they actually taught me to be tougher and actually helped me through the process of writing this book and to get like to keep persevering and keep pushing myself because there were so many times I had just, been beaten down, just thinking, who am I? I was nobody. I had no confidence, nothing. And it gave me a sense of like, you could do this because you did all this. I was also in a tragic car accident myself at 13. I was riding my bike to school and a car hit me going about 100 miles an hour. And it was really a miracle I'd lived. And through that, I had a traumatic brain injury. And that story links through Lee is that she knew everything to do for me to help me with the traumatic brain injury before it was really a thing. Doctors were just like, okay, she lived, send her home. But there was all these other problems with me. And Lee really helped me with the focus. It was like the Karate Kid, when they learned how to, it was that focus of cleaning. I was her housekeeper. I was doing her shining the faucets and the crystals over and over and over again. And she would say, use that elbow grease, use that elbow grease. And it was all about focus because I couldn't focus for 1 minute, not even a nanosecond. I was off into another space. So writing the book taught me to stay focused, to persevere as this in the same way I did when I was recovering from my accident. Lee saw my perseverance, and I think that resilience that I had was something she saw that she knew I could get this book done. If you could say first full circle, she taught me the skills to get this book done.
Absolutely. Wow. And that is like two interrelated gifts sort of that she gave you then. She gave you that sense of resilience that, helped her overcome her own experiences to end up with your family. And also that power in telling your story, because in telling her story, you also ended up telling your own. And that's really quite lovely.
Well, it's interesting because you can't know Lee unless you knew her and our family. The person who she was when she arrived on our doorstep in 1965 with her little Mary Poppins purse, and so sweet and so loving and so innocent, like she just had this peace about her, and my mom just loved her soul immediately and had a trust in her. But everything about her was a lie. So she couldn't open up and tell that lie while she was alive because she didn't want to disappoint my mom because they became kindred spirits, like soulmates. And as all of us did, we all just really depended on Lee. There was no reason for it because things were working. Lee Lee loved our family. We loved her, endlessly. She was family. She was our family. So there was no breaking that rhythm until the story was unveiled itself when God's timing came. And it was time, and I believe 30 years now since her death, this is the time the world should know that this woman survived the unthinkable and became this light for another family. And it's really not what happens to you in life, I think, for the readers, and it's what you do with what happens to you. That is really the takeaway for readers.
Excellent. Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. And, thank you for sharing her story and your own. What is next for you? Are you writing anything right now?
Yeah, I have another story in the pipe, but it's more like a outline because I've started writing it and I have little pieces of it together, and I'm not ready to divulge it yet because it's still in the making, if you know what I mean. And it's something that my husband goes, "How long is this going to take you?" And I go, "Well, hopefully not as long as the first one because I had to learn how to write." This, the housekeeper's secret was my teacher, just like Lee was my teacher. She was still teaching me from the grave.
That's beautiful. Well, Godspeed on your next project. I'm very excited to read it. And thank you for stopping by to chat. This has been really lovely.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Okay, listeners, now it's your turn. Please check out The Housekeeper's Secret. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out. So please head to your favorite independent bookstore or library, wherever you like to go get books. Thank you for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.